The council chamber erupted in a cacophony of alien communications as delegates reacted to the observer's unprecedented request. Sarah Chen found herself at the center of a diplomatic storm, unlike anything in Federation history, watching as species that had cooperated peacefully for millennia struggled to process what humanity represented. Order, resonated Zixthera's voice, cutting through the chaos with harmonic frequencies that demanded attention. We will address this matter systematically. First, we must determine whether the observer's request indicates successful human manipulation of Federation personnel. The Silthuri delegates' scales flashed warning patterns. Their species is known for emotional manipulation and persuasive communication. The observer may have been compromised by exposure to human social techniques. Sarah wanted to protest but knew that any words from her could be interpreted as further evidence of human manipulation. She watched helplessly as the Federation's most senior delegates debated whether humanity's positive influence on the observer was actually evidence against them. Analysis of observer behavioral patterns shows no indication of manipulation or coercion, reported the Centaurian librarian after accessing archived data about the observer's previous missions. The entity's requests appear to stem from genuine intellectual curiosity and professional interest rather than emotional compromise. The Therixian delegate's stone form rumbled with skepticism. Professional interest in studying human moral development suggests they possess unique characteristics worthy of extended observation. This could indicate either exceptional virtue or exceptional danger. The meditation master projected thoughtful harmonics. Perhaps we should consider consulting the observer directly about its motivations and findings. Real-time communication with the human colony is possible through quantum entanglement protocols. Sarah's pulse quickened. Direct communication between the council and the observer could provide immediate answers to their questions, but it would also expose the observer to intense scrutiny from some of the galaxy's most powerful entities. She hoped their crystalline friend was prepared for what was coming. Establish communication link, Zixthera commanded, and the chamber's central holographic array activated with streams of quantum data reaching across space to Kepler 442b. Within moments, the observer's familiar crystalline form materialized in the chamber, its energy patterns slightly distorted by the vast distance but clearly recognizable. Sarah could see the colony meeting hall in the background, where human colonists were gathered to witness this historic moment. Observer Unit Kethvalor reporting, the entity announced, its voice carrying clearly through the quantum link. I am prepared to answer council inquiries about my findings and recommendations. The Valkyrian delegate's wings buzzed aggressively. Explain your request for permanent assignment to human populations. Why would a Federation observer wish to remain with a species under evaluation? Kethvalor's form pulsed with what Sarah had learned to recognize as careful thought. During my observation period, I encountered behaviors and thought patterns that challenge fundamental assumptions about species development. Humans demonstrate something unprecedented in my experience. Specify these unprecedented behaviors, demanded the Kralix delegate. They possess the ability to change their own nature through conscious effort. Kethvalor replied. Most species develop ethical systems and maintain them consistently. Humans create ethical systems, recognize their flaws, and actively work to improve both themselves and their moral frameworks. Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with anxiety. Kethvalor was describing something she had never really thought about consciously, but she recognized the truth of it. Humans did seem to constantly challenge themselves to be better than they were. The ethereal consciousness of the Void Wanderers projected interest. Elaborate on this capacity for self-directed moral evolution. I observed humans recognizing mistakes in their thinking and correcting them in real time, Kethvalor explained. When colonist Maria Santos suggested reducing elderly rations, other humans didn't simply reject her proposal. They engaged her in dialogue that helped her understand why her fear had led to an unethical conclusion. She then modified her position and became an advocate for protecting vulnerable community members. This could be normal social learning, suggested the Fotari delegate. It goes beyond social learning, Kethvalor insisted. They demonstrated the ability to examine their own moral intuitions, recognize when those intuitions conflicted with their stated values, and consciously choose to modify their emotional responses. This represents a form of ethical self-modification that I have not encountered in other species. The meditation master projected fascination. They can change their own moral emotional programming through conscious effort? Not only can they do this, they consider it a moral obligation, Kethveller replied. They believe they have a responsibility to become better people throughout their lives. They view moral stagnation as a form of failure. Sarah watched the council members process this information with obvious surprise. She was beginning to understand that humanity's constant drive for self-improvement might be rarer in the galaxy than she had ever imagined. You mentioned that humans consistently choose community, welfare over individual survival, Zixthera noted. Is this a reliable pattern or situational behavior? I have now observed the colony for over a week since revealing my identity, Kethveller reported. The behavior patterns remain consistent. They prioritize community cohesion and individual dignity, even when facing ongoing resource challenges. What about their response to discovering your true nature? Asked the Therixian delegate. Did they react with hostility or demands for compensation? Kethveller's form brightened with what Sarah recognized as pleasure. Their response was remarkable. Initial anger gave way to curiosity about Federation culture and concern for my welfare during the evaluation process. They offered to help me understand human behavior more thoroughly, to ensure my report would be accurate and fair. They offered to help their own judge. The Silthari delegate's scales rippled with disbelief. Colony Administrator Morrison stated that they wanted the Federation to understand humanity accurately, whether that led to membership approval or rejection. Kethveller confirmed. They expressed willingness to accept whatever decision the Council made, provided it was based on complete and truthful information about their species. The chamber fell silent as delegates absorbed this information. Sarah realized that the colonists' response to discovering they were being tested might be more important than their behavior during the test itself. Observer Kethveller, projected the meditation master, you have requested permanent assignment to continue studying human development. What specific research do you propose to conduct? Humans appear to be in active evolutionary transition from a conflict-oriented species to a cooperation-oriented species, Kethveller replied. This transition is happening not through biological evolution, but through conscious cultural and individual development. I wish to document this process and understand the mechanisms that enable it. And what do you believe the Federation could learn from such research? Asked the Centaurian librarian. Kethveller paused, energy patterns swirling in complex configurations. Most Federation species achieved ethical stability before developing advanced technology. Humans are developing ethics and technology simultaneously, creating unprecedented challenges and opportunities. Understanding their methods for managing this transition could benefit other species facing similar developmental phases. Sarah felt her breath catch. Kethveller was suggesting that humanity's struggles with morality and technology might actually make them valuable teachers for other species, rather than dangerous students who needed careful monitoring. Furthermore, Kethveller continued, human approaches to conflict resolution, moral reasoning, and community building demonstrate innovations that could enhance Federation practices. They have developed techniques for managing disagreement and diversity that exceed current Federation protocols in some areas. The chamber erupted, again in multilingual debate, as delegates grappled with the possibility that the species seeking membership might have something to teach the Federation rather than merely something to learn from. Zixthera's voice cut through the chaos once more. Observer Kethveller, provide your final recommendation regarding human Federation membership. The crystalline being's form pulsed with absolute certainty. I recommend immediate provisional membership with extended observation and cultural exchange protocols. Humanity demonstrates the ethical development necessary for Federation membership, and their unique developmental approaches represent valuable knowledge that the Federation should preserve and study. Sarah closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to whatever powers might be listening. The decision now rested with the Council, and she could only hope that Kethveller's unprecedented recommendation would carry enough weight to overcome millennia of Federation caution about admitting new species. The transmission reached the Galactic Federation Council chambers in the form of pure data streams that painted a complex picture of human behavior under stress. Ambassador Sarah Chen watched the council members' reactions as the observer's report materialized in holographic displays around the vast chamber. Zixathara, the chief interrogator, absorbed the data through direct neural interface, its crystalline form fluctuating with surprise and what might have been confusion. Around the chamber, delegates from dozens of species processed the information through their own sensory systems, some reading scrolling text, others experiencing emotional resonances, still others interpreting the data through color patterns or musical harmonies. "This is highly irregular," rumbled the Therixian delegate, a massive stone-like being whose voice sounded like grinding granite. The observer was supposed to document human responses to survival stress, not conduct an extended cultural analysis. Sarah remained silent, knowing that any interruption could be interpreted as human interference with Federation deliberations. But inside, her heart raced as she tried to interpret the reactions of beings whose expressions and body language were completely alien to her. The Valkyrian delegate's wings buzzed with agitation. The report contains excessive detail about human emotional processing and social structures. We requested an evaluation of their potential for violence and conquest, not a philosophical treatise on their moral development. "Perhaps," interjected the Fotari representative, its energy form pulsing with what Sarah had learned to recognize as diplomatic caution. "We should consider why the observer felt such detail was relevant to its assessment." Zixthara's form brightened as it finished processing the complete report. The observer encountered something unexpected. These humans consistently chose community welfare over individual survival, even when resources were critically limited. This pattern contradicts our previous observations of their species. Sarah felt a flicker of hope, but the Silthari delegate's scales immediately shifted to warning colors. Deception is common among species seeking Federation membership. They may have detected the observer and performed for its benefit. The observer addressed this possibility, Zixthara replied, accessing additional data streams. Extended behavioral analysis indicates no evidence of performance or deception. The humans' actions remained consistent even during private moments when they believed themselves unobserved. The Krelix delegate released a sulphurous puff of skepticism. One colony cannot represent an entire species. Earth humans might behave differently than colonial populations. This too was considered, Zixthara said. Cross-reference with existing observational data from Earth and other human colonies shows consistent patterns of behavior. While individual responses vary, the underlying value systems appear remarkably stable across their population. Sarah watched nervously as the Council began accessing comparative data about humanity's behavior across their various worlds. She knew this information included some of humanity's darker moments, the resource wars, the Mars colony uprising, the Luna mining disputes. If the Council focused on those events rather than humanity's growth and learning from them, the meditation master of the Zephyrian Collective, a being of pure thought form that communicated through carefully modulated telepathic harmonies, projected a question that reached every mind in the chamber simultaneously. The observer's report suggests these humans possess an unusual relationship with suffering. They appear to view hardship as an opportunity for moral development, rather than justification for abandoning ethical principles. Sarah blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected that interpretation of the data. But as she thought about it, the observation seemed accurate. Humans did tend to see challenges as chances to prove their character, rather than excuses to lower their standards. This correlates with historical analysis of human cultural development, added the Centaurian librarian, a multi-tentacled being whose species served as the Federation's institutional memory. Their literature, philosophy, and legal systems consistently emphasize growth through adversity and redemption through effort. The Valkyrian delegates' agitation increased. Their military history shows extensive warfare and violence. How do we reconcile peaceful colonial behavior with aggressive historical patterns? Zixthara accessed human historical data, its form pulsing as it processed centuries of human conflict and development. Analysis reveals a species in transition. Early human warfare was driven by resource competition and territorial disputes. Later conflicts increasingly involved ideological differences about governance and social organization. Recent military actions have focused primarily on defensive operations and humanitarian interventions. Evolution of motivation, observed the Fotari delegate. They fight for different reasons now than they did in their past. Sarah held her breath as she realized the council was beginning to understand something fundamental about humanity that even she had never articulated clearly. Humans weren't naturally peaceful, but they were naturally aspirational. They fought, but increasingly for principles rather than possessions. The Therixian delegates' massive form shifted, stone grinding against stone. The Observer's report includes documentation of internal human debate about resource allocation during crisis. They argued extensively about competing moral principles, rather than simply implementing survival protocols. They appear to find the process of moral reasoning as important as the outcomes, noted the meditation master. This suggests a species that views ethical development as an ongoing project rather than a fixed state. The Silthari delegates' scales rippled with confusion. This behavior pattern is inefficient for survival purposes. Why would natural selection favor individuals who prioritize abstract principles over immediate practical needs? The answer came from an unexpected source: the ethereal consciousness of the Void Wanderers, an ancient entity that rarely participated in council deliberations, projected its thoughts directly into the chamber's translation matrices. Because they understand that survival of the body means nothing without survival of the spirit. They have learned that becoming monsters, to avoid death, is not survival but transformation into something that was never worth preserving. Silence filled the chamber as the implications of this observation settled among the delegates. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as she realized that one of the galaxy's oldest and wisest entities had just articulated something profound about human nature. The Observer's report includes a specific recommendation, Zixathara announced, drawing attention back to the immediate question of Federation membership. Despite documentation of human flaws and contradictions, the Observer concludes that humanity demonstrates the ethical development necessary for Federation membership. The Kralix delegate expelled another skeptical cloud. Based on observation of a single colony during a brief crisis, this seems insufficient evidence for such a significant recommendation. The Observer requests permission to extend its evaluation, Zixthera continued. It wishes to spend additional time among human populations to further document their behavioral patterns and moral development processes. Sarah's heart stopped. An extended evaluation could take years, during which humanity would remain isolated and unable to benefit from Federation technology and knowledge. But it might also provide the thorough documentation needed to convince skeptical council members. Furthermore, Zixthera added, the Observer has made an unusual personal request. What kind of request? Asked the Valkyrian delegate. It wishes to remain embedded with the human colony permanently, continuing its research, but also serving as a cultural liaison between humans and the Federation. The Observer reports that it has become invested in the outcome of human development. Sarah stared at Zixathera in shock. A Federation observer requesting permanent assignment to study and work with humanity. This was unprecedented in her knowledge of Federation history. The meditation master projected mild amusement. The observer appears to have been affected by human social patterns. Is this concerning or encouraging for Federation purposes? Unknown, admitted Zixathera. It represents another unprecedented element in this evaluation. The chamber fell silent as delegates considered this unexpected development. Sarah realized that humanity wasn't just being judged for Federation membership anymore. They had somehow managed to intrigue and inspire one of the Federation's own representatives enough that it wanted to continue working with them. The question now was whether the Council would see this as proof of human worthiness or evidence of human manipulation of Federation officials. The transmission array hummed to life as the observer prepared to send its report across the galaxy to the Federation Council chambers. Janet Morrison stood nearby, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether humanity remained forever isolated on their small collection of worlds or gained access to a galactic community that spanned thousands of star systems. Before you send that report, Janet said, surprising herself with her boldness, I want you to see something else. The observer's crystalline form paused, energy patterns shifting across its surface. Your observation period has concluded. Additional evidence is not required. Maybe not required, Janet replied, but it might be relevant. You've been here for 3 days during our crisis. But you haven't seen what happens when we're not afraid. She gestured toward the viewing wall of the communications center, where the colony's main dome stretched out below them. Computer display colony activity patterns for the past 6 months. Holographic displays materialized in the air, showing a complex web of daily life in New Terra. The observer moved closer, its attention captured by the intricate patterns of human interaction over time. These are our work rotations, Janet explained, highlighting different colored streams of data. Notice that everyone contributes according to their abilities, but no one is forced to work beyond their physical limits. The elderly teach and provide childcare. People with disabilities are accommodated and included in community decisions. No one is left out. The observer studied the patterns with apparent fascination. Your resource distribution appears inefficient from a purely survival perspective. You allocate significant resources to individuals who provide minimal economic return. Because people aren't economic units, Dr. Rodriguez said, joining them at the display. They're human beings with inherent worth regardless of their productivity. Show him the art district, called out Lisa Park from across the room. She was David's sister and worked as one of the colony's cultural coordinators. Janet smiled and highlighted another section of the data. Even when we're struggling to survive, we dedicate resources to art, music, literature, and education. We have concerts every week, art classes for children, a community theater group that performs plays written by colonists. The observer's energy patterns fluctuated in what Janet was learning to recognize as surprise. You prioritize non-essential activities during resource scarcity? They're not non-essential, protested Thomas Chen, who had followed them to the communications center. They're what makes survival meaningful. What's the point of staying alive if we stop being human in the process? Dr. Rodriguez pulled up another data stream. Look at our conflict resolution patterns. When people disagree, we don't just enforce compliance or exile dissenters. We have mediation processes, community discussions, ways for people to work through problems while maintaining respect for each other. The observers studied the conflict resolution data with intense focus. Your species tolerates significant disagreement without resorting to violence or expulsion. We don't just tolerate it, Janet said. We encourage it. Different perspectives make us stronger. When Maria suggested reducing elderly rations, that started a conversation that helped all of us think more clearly about our values and priorities. But surely you have limits, the observer said. What happens when someone commits serious crimes or threatens community safety? Janet exchanged glances with Chief Williams, who had been monitoring the conversation from his security station. Show him the Morrison case, Williams said quietly. Janet's jaw tightened. The Morrison case was a painful memory, but Williams was right that it demonstrated something important about their community. 6 months ago, we had a colonist named James Morrison, no relation to me, who was caught stealing food from community stores, Janet explained. The theft threatened our food security during a difficult period. The observer's attention sharpened. How was this crime punished? First, we tried to understand why he did it, Dr. Rodriguez said. We discovered that James was struggling with addiction to stimulants he had brought from Earth. He was trading food for drugs because his judgment was impaired. The community voted on his punishment, Williams added. The options were exile, imprisonment, or rehabilitation. Exile would have been a death sentence on this world. Imprisonment would have removed a productive community member without addressing the underlying problem. So we chose rehabilitation, Janet continued. James spent 3 months in medical treatment for his addiction, followed by community service and counseling. He had to earn back the trust he had lost, but we gave him the opportunity to do so. The observer processed this information for several long moments. This approach required significant resource investment with no guarantee of success. James has been clean for 3 months and is now one of our most effective agricultural workers, Williams said with obvious pride. He also helps counsel other colonists who struggle with addiction or mental health issues. The investment in his rehabilitation has paid off many times over. More importantly, Thomas Chen added, it demonstrated to everyone in the colony that we don't abandon people who make mistakes. We believe in redemption and second chances. The observer's form pulsed with intense energy patterns. Your species consistently chooses approaches that prioritize long-term community cohesion over immediate efficiency or safety. Because that's what builds the kind of society we want to live in, Janet said. We didn't come to the stars just to survive. We came to build something better than what we left behind on Earth. Lisa Park stepped forward, holding a small device. Can I show you something personal? The observer nodded consent, and Lisa activated a portable projector that filled the air with images of colony life over the past 6 months. But these weren't official records or data streams. These were personal photographs and videos that colonists had taken of each other. The images showed children playing in the hydroponics gardens, elderly colonists teaching traditional crafts, to young people, multi-generational families sharing meals together. There were pictures of birthday parties, wedding celebrations, and memorial services for those who had died. There were images of people working together on construction projects, helping each other move into new homes, and gathering for community events. This is what you've really been observing, Lisa said softly. Not just a collection of survival strategies, but a community that cares about each other. We're not perfect, and we don't always make the right choices immediately. But we keep trying to do better. The final image in the sequence showed the moment 3 days ago when Dr. Chen had arrived at the colony. Even though resources were scarce and tensions were high, the photograph captured colonists welcoming the newcomers with smiles and offered hands. You arrived during our worst crisis in months, Janet said. Food was running low, our crops were failing, and people were scared. But look at how we treated you. Even when we were afraid, even when we had every reason to be suspicious of strangers, we chose to offer hospitality and trust. The observer studied the image of its own arrival for a long time. The individual who took this photograph knew I was a stranger who might threaten colony security, yet captured a moment of welcome rather than suspicion. Because that's who we are, said David Park, who had apparently taken the picture. We choose hope over fear, trust over suspicion, community over isolation. Not because it's easy, but because it's right. The observer turned toward the transmission array, energy patterns swirling across its crystalline surface in complex configurations. I must now report my findings to the Federation Council, but I find myself in a position I did not anticipate when this mission began. What kind of position? Janet asked. I came here expecting to observe a species making survival choices that would reveal their fundamental character. Instead, I have witnessed a community that consistently chooses its character over mere survival. This presents a unique challenge in making my recommendation to the Council. The emergency colony assembly had been called within an hour of the observer's revelation. Now nearly the entire population of New Terra sat in the main meeting hall, their faces reflecting a mixture of shock, anger, and fear. The crystalline being stood at the center of the room, no longer bothering to maintain its human disguise. Janet Morrison watched from the administrative section as heated discussions broke out across the assembled colonists. These people had come to Kepler 442b seeking a new life among the stars, and now they discovered that their every action for the past 3 days had been scrutinized by an alien judge whose report would determine humanity's future. This is outrageous, shouted Marcus Webb, one of the agricultural specialists whose crops were failing. You infiltrated our colony under false pretenses, lied to us, spied on us during our worst crisis, and now you're going to judge our entire species based on 3 days of observation? A chorus of angry voices supported Webb's outrage, but Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the colony's chief medical officer, raised her hand for silence. I understand everyone's anger, but getting emotional won't help us now. The question is, what do we do moving forward? The observer remained silent in the center of the crowd, its crystalline form pulsing with patient light. Janet could see that it was recording everything, analyzing not just their words, but their body language, their tone, their choices about how to respond to this revelation. What exactly are you looking for? Called out Sarah Kim, a hydroponics engineer. What would make humanity worthy of Federation membership in your eyes? The observer's voice resonated through the hall. The Federation has learned that technological advancement means nothing without ethical development. We have seen species destroy themselves and others once they gain access to galactic-level power. We must know that humanity can be trusted. Trusted with what? Demanded Chief of Security Williams, his hand instinctively moving toward his sidearm before he caught himself and forced his arm back to his side. With knowledge that could reshape or destroy entire worlds, with technology that could extend life indefinitely or create weapons beyond imagination, with the ability to travel instantly between star systems and contact civilizations across the galaxy. The observer's form brightened. Power that could make your species gods or demons depending on how you choose to use it. The hall fell silent as the implications sank in. Janet looked around at faces that reflected the weight of responsibility. These were ordinary people, farmers, engineers, doctors, teachers, who had come to build a simple life on a distant world. Now they were being asked to represent the moral character of their entire species. Old Thomas Chen, one of the senior colonists, slowly stood up. At 83, he was among the oldest residents of New Terra, and his voice carried the authority of someone who had lived through humanity's worst and best moments. "You want to know what kind of people we are?" he said, his weathered voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "You've been watching us during our hardest days when we're scared and hungry, and facing the possibility of losing everything we've worked for. And you want to judge all of humanity based on what you've seen here." The observer pulsed acknowledgement. The Galactic Federation believes that crisis reveals true character. How a species behaves when survival is at stake shows their fundamental nature. Thomas Chen nodded slowly. "Then let me tell you what you've really been watching. You've seen us argue about rationing, yes. You've seen people suggest that maybe the strong should eat while the weak go hungry. But you've also seen what happened to those suggestions." He gestured toward Maria Santos, the woman who had proposed reducing elderly rations. She sat with tears in her eyes, surrounded by neighbors who had spent the past day helping her understand why her proposal had been wrong. Maria there spoke from fear, not cruelty, and when she did, the rest of us didn't cast her out or condemn her. We talked to her. We explained why we couldn't abandon our principles even when we're afraid, and she listened and learned and became part of the solution. The observer's attention focused on Maria Santos. "Is this accurate?" Maria stood up, her voice shaky but determined. "I was terrified that my children would starve. When I suggested reducing rations for the elderly, I wasn't thinking clearly. But my neighbors didn't attack me for it. They sat with me and helped me remember that the elderly in our community have wisdom and experience we need. They reminded me that my own grandmother had sacrificed for me when I was young, and that we owe the same loyalty to our elders." "You changed your position based on emotional appeals," the observer noted. "No," Maria replied firmly. "I changed my position based on moral reasoning and community values. My neighbors helped me think through the implications of what I was suggesting. They helped me see that survival isn't just about staying alive, it's about staying human." Dr. Rodriguez stood up next. "You mentioned Tommy Martinez's collapse yesterday. You saw us share our food with his family, but did you understand why?" The observer waited silently. "Tommy is 12 years old," Dr. Rodriguez continued. "He collapsed because he had been giving half his rations to his younger sister without telling anyone. When we found out, the community response wasn't just about helping one family. It was about recognizing that we had failed to notice a child sacrificing himself for someone even more vulnerable." Janet felt a surge of pride as she watched her people explain themselves. They weren't making excuses or trying to hide their flaws. They were showing the observer how their community worked, how they supported each other and learned from their mistakes. "You want to know what kind of species we are?" said Chief Williams, his earlier hostility replaced by something like determination. "We're the kind that argues about the right thing to do instead of just accepting that suffering is inevitable. We're the kind that stands up for our principles even when it's difficult. We're the kind that takes care of each other even when resources are scarce." The observer's form pulsed with what might have been interest. "Yet your species has a history of warfare and violence that concerns the Federation greatly." Young David Park, barely 18 and one of the newest colonists, spoke up from the back of the hall. "My grandfather fought in the last war on Earth. He told me stories about the terrible things people did to each other when they forgot they were all human. But he also told me why they finally stopped fighting." The hall turned to listen to the youngest voice among them. They stopped because they realized that the real enemy wasn't each other. The real enemy was hunger, disease, ignorance, and despair. "My grandfather said that humans fight hardest when they're fighting for something worth protecting, not when they're fighting for conquest or revenge." The observer focused on David with apparent fascination. "And what do you believe is worth protecting?" David's voice grew stronger. Each other, the idea that everyone deserves dignity and respect, the hope that we can be better tomorrow than we are today, the dream that our children will inherit a universe where cooperation matters more than domination. The crystalline being stood motionless for several long moments, processing what it had heard. Finally, it spoke again. You have given me much to consider. I must transmit my observations to the Federation Council, but I find myself facing an unexpected dilemma. Janet stepped forward. What kind of dilemma? I came here expecting to observe a species making survival choices that would reveal their fundamental character. Instead, I have witnessed a community actively choosing to maintain their moral principles even when survival itself was at stake. This was not a behavior pattern the Federation Council anticipated. On Kepler 442b, Colony Administrator Janet Morrison stared at the being standing in her office with a mixture of shock and growing dread. What she had known as Dr. Alex Chen, a refugee biochemist who had arrived 3 days ago claiming to flee political persecution on Earth, was now revealing itself to be something entirely alien. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. The human facade was melting away like a sophisticated hologram losing power, revealing crystalline features that pulsed with inner light. This was Zixathera's observer, and it had been living among them, watching, judging. You've been spying on us, Janet said, her voice carefully controlled despite the anger building in her chest. Through her office windows, she could see the colony's main dome stretching out below, housing nearly 8,000 human settlers who had no idea their future was being decided by their actions over the past 3 days. Observing, the being corrected, its voice now carrying the same resonant quality that made Janet's bones vibrate. Your species stands at a crossroads. The Galactic Federation must know if you can be trusted with the knowledge and technology that membership provides. Janet's mind raced through everything that had happened since Dr. Chen had arrived. The colony had been struggling with their latest crisis, a blight affecting their food crops that threatened the next harvest. Resources were stretched thin, and tempers had been running high. How had they treated this stranger during their time of need? What exactly did you see that concerns the Federation so much? Janet asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. The observer's crystalline form flickered as it accessed memories. I witnessed your people making difficult decisions about resource allocation. I saw anger, frustration, and fear. I observed how your species behaves when survival is at stake. Janet felt sick. The past 3 days had been particularly challenging. The crop blight had forced them to implement strict rationing, and there had been heated arguments in the council meetings about how to distribute their remaining food stores. Some colonists had advocated for reducing rations to the elderly and infirm first, arguing that younger people needed more calories for the physical labor required to save the colony. Others had fought fiercely against this proposal. But I also witnessed something unexpected, the observer continued, and Janet caught a note of what might have been confusion in its voice. Your people's response to my arrival was puzzling. Janet remembered the day Dr. Chen had arrived. The transport from Earth had been overdue, and when it finally landed, it carried only a handful of passengers and emergency supplies, instead of the full load of equipment and personnel they had desperately needed. Among the passengers had been this quiet scientist claiming asylum. You gave me shelter without question, the observer said. Despite your own shortages, you provided me with food, clothing, and housing. When I offered to help with your agricultural crisis, you welcomed my assistance even though my credentials could not be verified through normal channels. Janet remembered the debates about that decision. Security Chief Williams had wanted to quarantine the new arrivals until their identities could be confirmed, but Dr. Rodriguez from the medical team had argued that anyone fleeing persecution deserved their protection. In the end, the Colony Council had voted to trust the newcomers. Yesterday, when the rationing became critical, I expected to see your people turn against outsiders first, the observer continued. In my experience, most species prioritize their established community members over strangers during times of scarcity. But your ration distribution included me without question. No one suggested that the newcomers should receive less food than established colonists. Janet felt a flicker of pride mixed with continued anxiety. The colony had indeed treated their unexpected guests fairly, but she knew there had been uglier moments over the past 3 days as well. As if reading her thoughts, the observer's form pulsed darker. However, I also witnessed disturbing behaviors. I saw your people argue about prioritizing care for the youngest and strongest. I heard suggestions that those too old or sick to work should receive reduced rations. I observed anger and desperation that led to heated confrontations. We're human, Janet replied quietly. We're not perfect. We get scared and angry, and sometimes we say things we don't mean when we're facing extinction, but we also try to do better. Indeed, this is what has confused me. The observer moved to the window, its crystalline body refracting the harsh light of Kepler 442b's star into rainbow patterns across the office walls. In those same heated debates, I watched other colonists stand up to defend the vulnerable. When Maria Santos suggested reducing elderly rations, I saw at least a dozen people immediately voice their opposition, including some who looked hungry themselves. Janet remembered that council session. It had been brutal, with emotions running high as they faced the possibility of starvation. But every time someone suggested abandoning their principles for survival, others had pushed back, reminding them of who they wanted to be even in their darkest hour. When young Tommy Martinez collapsed from hunger yesterday, I expected to see your people hoard resources for their own families, the observer continued. Instead, I watched his neighbors share their own rations to help him recover. His family received additional food from 17 different sources without being asked to provide anything in return. Janet smiled despite her anxiety. Tommy's collapse had terrified everyone, but the response had been immediate and generous. Families who were already living on minimum rations had insisted on sharing with the Martinez family, arguing that they would all survive together or not at all. And then there was the incident with Dr. Patel, the observer said, turning back to face Janet. When she accused me of potentially being a saboteur who might have caused the crop blight, I prepared for rejection and exile. Instead, your colony held a fair hearing, where I was allowed to defend myself and present evidence of my innocence. Janet winced. Dr. Patel's accusations had been harsh and potentially dangerous for someone in Dr. Chen's position. Fear made people paranoid, and in their current situation, accusations of sabotage could easily lead to violence. But the colony had insisted on following proper procedures even when emotions were running high. The vote to trust me was close, the observer admitted. 43% of your people wanted me confined pending further investigation. But 57% chose to maintain faith in due process even when that choice might have put them at greater risk. And what conclusion have you drawn from all this? Janet asked, dreading the answer. The observer's form pulsed in what Janet was beginning to recognize as deep thought. Your species is indeed violent and prone to conflict, but you are also capable of extraordinary compassion and moral courage under pressure. You struggle with fear and anger, yet consistently choose to uphold principles that protect the vulnerable even when doing so might cost you personally. Janet held her breath, waiting for the final judgment that would determine humanity's future among the stars. I must report my findings to the Federation Council, the observer said finally, but I confess I am no longer certain what recommendation I should make. The diplomatic chamber hummed with tension as Ambassador Sarah Chen stood before the Galactic Council's most feared interrogator. Zixthara, a crystalline being whose body pulsed with dangerous energy, towered above the human representative. Around them, delegates from dozens of species watched in silence, their various forms of breathing creating an eerie symphony in the vast hall. Sarah's hands remained steady despite the gravity of the situation. 3 months of negotiations had led to this moment. Humanity's application to join the Galactic Federation hung in the balance, and everything depended on what happened in the next few minutes. Your species has been observed for 2 standard cycles. Zixthara's voice resonated through both sound and telepathic waves that made Sarah's teeth ache. We have witnessed your wars, your destruction, your tendency toward violence. Yet you claim to seek peace and cooperation among the stars. The chamber's atmospheric processors adjusted to accommodate the diverse breathing requirements of the assembled delegates. Sarah could smell the sulfurous emissions from the Kralix delegation and the sweet ozone scent that followed the energy-based Photari representatives. Each species present had earned their place through centuries of proving their worth to the Federation. We do seek peace, Sarah replied, her voice carrying clearly through the translation matrices that allowed universal communication. But we also understand that sometimes peace must be fought for and defended. A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through Zixthara's crystalline form. Fighting for peace. How typically human. Your species has a curious relationship with contradiction. Behind Sarah, her small human delegation remained silent. Captain Marcus Rodriguez, the military advisor, kept his expression neutral despite the obvious hostility in the room. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the xenobiologist, took careful notes on the reactions of different species to the proceedings. They had all known this moment would come. The Galactic Federation had existed for over 10,000 years, bringing together hundreds of species under a banner of mutual cooperation and shared knowledge. But membership came with a price. Each species had to prove not just their technological advancement, but their emotional and philosophical maturity. Too many civilizations had torn themselves apart before reaching the stars, and the Federation had no intention of importing that chaos. Your species has eliminated poverty on your homeworld, Zixthara continued, accessing data that scrolled across holographic displays around the chamber. You have developed faster than light travel, mastered genetic medicine, and created artificial intelligence that serves rather than dominates. These are admirable achievements. Sarah felt a flutter of hope, but Zixthara's next words crushed it immediately. However, you have also maintained military forces that could devastate planets, created weapons capable of sterilizing solar systems, and your entertainment media glorifies violence in ways that disturb many of our member species. You are a contradiction wrapped in an enigma, as one of your own philosophers might say. The Valkyrian delegate, a tall, insectoid being with iridescent wings, clicked disapprovingly. Their warrior culture concerns us greatly. We have seen what happens when violent species gain access to Federation technology. Sarah knew the history they were referencing. The Kethvar incident, 3,000 years ago, when a militaristic species had used Federation knowledge to attempt galactic conquest. It had taken the combined forces of 50 member worlds to stop them, and the devastation had lasted for centuries. We understand your concerns, Sarah said carefully, but I would argue that our military traditions are precisely why we should be trusted with Federation membership. We have learned to channel our aggressive instincts toward protection rather than conquest. Words, hissed the Silthari representative, a serpentine being whose scales shifted color with emotion. Easy to speak, difficult to prove. Zixthara's form pulsed brighter, and Sarah felt the weight of ancient intelligence focusing on her. Indeed, this is why we have designed a particular test for your species. You see, we have been monitoring not just your world, but your colonies as well. Sarah's blood chilled. The Federation had been watching their expansion efforts. Their colonies were still struggling to establish themselves. And if the Federation had seen some of the harsher realities of colonial life, your colony on Kepler 442b has been of particular interest to us, Zixthara continued. A harsh world where your people have struggled against native predators, resource scarcity, and environmental challenges. We have observed how your species responds when stripped of the comforts of your homeworld. The holographic displays around the chamber shifted, showing images of New Terra, humanity's most challenging colonial effort. Sarah recognized the landscape, rust-colored canyons, strange crystalline formations, and the dome cities where colonists lived in constant vigilance against the planet's hostile ecosystem. 3 days ago, we placed one of our own among your colonists, Zixthara announced, and Sarah's heart stopped. A volunteer from our species, disguised as a human refugee fleeing persecution on Earth. This individual has been living among your people, observing their behavior when they believe no galactic authority is watching. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. If the Federation had placed a spy among the colonists, they had seen everything. The rationing decisions, the security protocols, the way humans treated outsiders when resources were scarce. Colonial life brought out both the best and worst in people, and Sarah had no idea what their observer might have witnessed. The results of this observation will determine whether humanity receives Federation membership, Zixthara continued. But we believe in fairness. We will give you an opportunity to influence the outcome. Sarah's mouth went dry. What kind of opportunity? We have revealed our observer's true identity to your colonists. They now know they are being tested, and they know their response will determine their species' future among the stars. Zixthara's form pulsed with what Sarah was beginning to recognize as satisfaction. I'm giving you one chance to prove your feelings, human. Do it now or it'll be too late. The chamber fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. Sarah realized that everything humanity had worked for, everything they had hoped to achieve among the stars, now depended on how a group of struggling colonists on a distant world chose to treat a single alien observer, and there was nothing she could do but wait to see if her species would pass or fail the ultimate test of character. The council chamber fell into the profound silence that preceded momentous decisions. Sarah Chen stood motionless as representatives of dozens of species contemplated a choice that would reshape humanity's future among the stars. The quantum link to Kepler 442b remained active, showing colonists gathered anxiously around Kethvalor as they awaited the Federation's judgment. Zixthera's crystalline form pulsed with the complex energy patterns that indicated deep consultation with the Council's collective wisdom systems. The observer's recommendation for provisional membership is unprecedented. We must consider not only humanity's current capabilities but their potential impact on Federation stability and development. The meditation master projected careful harmonies that reached every consciousness in the chamber. The question before us is not whether humans are perfect, but whether they possess the capacity for growth that Federation membership requires. The evidence suggests they exceed this requirement significantly. Sarah felt a flicker of hope, but the Velcarian delegates' agitated wing movements quickly tempered her optimism. Their history of warfare and internal conflict cannot be ignored. Provisional membership grants access to technologies that could be weaponized against other Federation worlds. All species possess destructive potential, rumbled the Therixian delegate with surprising support for humanity. The relevant factor is whether they demonstrate wisdom in how they apply their capabilities. The observer's documentation suggests humans consistently choose restraint and cooperation over dominance and exploitation. The Silthari representative's scales shifted through multiple color patterns, indicating internal conflict about the decision. Their emotional volatility concerns me. They make decisions based on feelings rather than logic. Correction, interjected the Centaurian librarian, accessing detailed analysis of the observer's data. They make decisions based on values that they have chosen through emotional and logical evaluation. Their capacity to integrate rational analysis with emotional understanding may represent an advanced form of decision-making rather than a primitive one. Sarah watched in amazement as the Federation's most analytical species defended humanity's emotional complexity. The librarian continued its assessment with mechanical precision that somehow conveyed profound respect. Human moral reasoning demonstrates sophistication that surpasses many Federation standards. They consider not only immediate consequences, but long-term implications for community development, individual dignity, and ethical precedent. Their decisions integrate multiple forms of intelligence rather than relying solely on computational analysis. The ethereal consciousness of the Void Wanderers, ancient and wise beyond measure, projected its thoughts with crystalline clarity. We have observed this species for centuries, watching them struggle with questions that many Federation worlds resolved millennia ago. But their struggle has produced something remarkable, a form of moral reasoning that remains dynamic and adaptive rather than fixed and dogmatic. Explain, requested Zixthara. Most species achieve ethical stability by establishing moral systems and maintaining them consistently. Humans achieve ethical development by questioning their own moral systems and improving them continuously. This creates temporary instability but enables long-term growth that exceeds what static systems can achieve. Sarah felt tears forming as she realized that humanity's greatest perceived weakness, their constant questioning and internal conflict about right and wrong, was being recognized as their greatest strength. The Kralix delegate expelled a cloud of acceptance. The observer's extended documentation supports this assessment. Even during resource crisis, humans continued to debate and refine their ethical positions rather than abandoning them for expedience. Their response to discovering they were being tested provides additional evidence, added the Futari representative. Rather than attempting to manipulate the outcome, they offered to help their evaluator understand them more accurately. This suggests a species that values truth over favorable judgment. Zixthara accessed the final components of the observer's report, energy patterns indicating careful consideration of every documented detail. Observer Keth Valor has provided extensive evidence that humans possess not only the ethical development necessary for Federation membership, but unique capabilities that could enhance Federation operations. Their techniques for managing diversity and disagreement within communities exceed current Federation protocols, noted the meditation master. Their approaches to rehabilitation rather than punishment for community violations show sophisticated understanding of social dynamics. The Therixian delegates' massive form shifted with what might have been amusement. They have even managed to inspire professional dedication from our own observer. Keth Valor's request for extended assignment suggests they possess unusual capacity for building cooperative relationships across species boundaries. Sarah looked through the quantum link at Keth Valor, whose crystalline form pulsed with what she had learned to recognize as nervous anticipation. Behind the observer, she could see Janet Morrison and the other colonists waiting with the same anxious hope that filled her own heart. "We have reached the moment of decision," Zixathera announced, and the chamber's energy systems activated to record the historic vote. All council members will now register their positions regarding Human Federation membership. The voting process proceeded with ceremonial gravity, as each species registered their decision through their preferred communication methods. The meditation master projected harmonic approval. The Therixian delegate's stone form glowed with acceptance. The Centaurian librarian transmitted detailed affirmation. One by one, the Federation's member species cast their votes. Sarah held her breath as the tally accumulated in the chamber's central display. Provisional membership required a 2/3 majority, and several species had expressed significant concerns about humanity's readiness for Federation technology and responsibility. The Velcarian delegate was among the last to vote, wings buzzing with continued uncertainty, before finally registering cautious approval. The Silthari representative remained undecided until the final moment, scales shifting through complex patterns before settling on acceptance. When the last vote was recorded, Zixathera's form blazed with ceremonial light. By margin of 87% approval, the Galactic Federation Council grants provisional membership to the human species, with full membership evaluation to be conducted after 5 standard years of observation and cooperation. Sarah's knees nearly gave out as the magnitude of the decision hit her. Humanity had not only gained access to the galactic community, but had done so with overwhelming support from species that had initially viewed them with suspicion and concern. Observer Keth Valor, Zixathera continued, "Your request for extended assignment is approved. You will serve as primary cultural liaison between humanity and the Federation, documenting their continued development and facilitating their integration into galactic society." Through the quantum link, Sarah could see celebration erupting in the colony meeting hall. Colonists embraced each other with tears of joy and relief, while Keth Valor's crystalline form pulsed with satisfaction at the successful conclusion of its mission. Ambassador Chen, Zixathera addressed her directly, "You will receive detailed information about provisional membership protocols and requirements. Federation technology transfers will begin immediately, starting with medical and agricultural assistance for your struggling colonies." Sarah found her voice at last. "On behalf of all humanity, I thank the Council for this opportunity. We will prove worthy of the trust you have placed in us." "You have already begun proving it," replied the meditation master with warm harmonics. "Your species' response to evaluation demonstrates the character that made this decision possible." As the formal session concluded and delegates began filing out of the chamber, Sarah remained at the viewing wall, watching the continued celebration on Kepler 442b through the quantum link. Janet Morrison approached Keth Valor with obvious emotion, offering the Federation observer a formal handshake that somehow became a gentle embrace between two very different forms of life. In that moment, Sarah understood what humanity had really achieved. They hadn't just gained Federation membership through political maneuvering or technological prowess. They had earned their place among the stars by demonstrating something far more valuable: the capacity to remain human even in the darkest circumstances, and the wisdom to grow into something better than they had been. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders that humanity was only beginning to imagine. But as Sarah watched a crystalline alien entity learning to appreciate human gestures of friendship on a distant world, she knew that humanity's greatest contribution to the galactic community wouldn't be their technology or military strength. It would be their persistent, stubborn, beautiful refusal to stop believing that tomorrow could be better than today, and their willingness to work tirelessly to make that belief reality. That was the gift they brought to the stars, and it was more precious than any treasure the galaxy could offer in return.